Welcome to the debate. We usually think of honesty in a relationship as, a bridge. It takes effort to build, but once it's up, it connects two separate islands so that people can reach each other.
Right, it's structural. It bears weight. It's basically what allows a relationship to withstand the elements over time.
Exactly. But then you examine the psychological landscape of intimate betrayal, and suddenly you realize that bridge isn't being maintained. It's being violently dismantled.
Oh, absolutely.
And the steel beams are being used as battering rams. We are looking at an emotional terrain where the absolute unfiltered truth is, well, honestly, it's a weapon.
It is the very definition of a scorched earth defense mechanism.
Today, we're going to dive deep into that emotional terrain by looking at the 2004 film Closer, but we are analyzing it through the framework of internal family systems, or IFS therapy.
Right. And for anyone who needs a quick refresher, it's a brutally sharp look at four interconnected people. You have Dan, who's an obituary writer who fancies himself a romantic, Alice, a stripper acting as his muse, Larry, a rough-around-the-edges dermatologist, and Anna, a photographer who's just caught in the middle of all of them.
And the real tragedy of this quartet isn't just that they lie and cheat. It's that they are heavily, inextricably blended with their protective psychological parts.
Yeah, and in IFS theory, when you are hijacked by these defense mechanisms, there is a total absence of your authentic self.
Right. The self being the core of who you are, the part that's characterized by compassion, calm, confidence, connection.
Exactly. Which is nowhere to be found here.
Nowhere. Which brings us to the central question we're debating today. Does the ultimate failure of the relationships in this narrative stem primarily from the aggressive weaponization of objective truth? Or does it stem from the fundamental refusal to ever present the authentic self?
It's a huge distinction.
It is. And I'll be arguing that the aggressive, retaliatory protectors, specifically Larry's use of objective truth as a weapon to mask his deep internal shame, are the most destructive and intractable forces at play. Because, when you violently enforce reality just to hurt someone, you shatter the very possibility of connection.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I argue that the evasive protectors, specifically Alice creating an entirely fake identity and Dan's romantic delusions, represent the foundational tragedy here.
The foundational tragedy?
Yes, because their complete withdrawal from vulnerability prevents genuine connection from ever forming. If you never actually show up as yourself, the destruction of the relationship is just a secondary consequence of a house built without a foundation.
All right, well, let's get right into the mechanics of this. Because to understand Larry's aggression, we have to briefly explain how these IFS parts actually operate. From my perspective, the core tragedy here is the sheer violence inflicted by what IFS calls firefighter parts.
Right, the extremists of the psyche.
Exactly. In this framework, you have managers who try to keep you safe and productive, and exiles, which are the deeply wounded, traumatized parts of you that hold on to pain or shame.
And for the listener, a good way to think about this is like a PR firm. Your manager is the slick PR rep working overtime to control your image. The exile is the scandalous, messy celebrity locked in the hotel room that the PR rep is desperately trying to hide from the world.
I love that analogy. It's so accurate. And the firefighter is the crisis management team that rushes in when the paparazzi break into the hotel room.
Right. They do damage control.
Extreme damage control. If the exile's pain is triggered, the firefighter will do anything to extinguish that pain, usually through extreme behavior like binge drinking, rage, running away.
Yeah, if you're listening and you've ever found yourself picking a massive screaming fight over loading the dishwasher just to avoid feeling neglected.
Which we've all done.
Exactly. That is your firefighter taking the wheel. It literally burns down the building to distract from the scandal.
Right. And Larry is our prime example of a terrifying firefighter. His manager part presents as this rough, practical, possessive guy. But what is that PR rep actually hiding?
Deep insecurity.
Yes, he's protecting an exile that holds agonizingly deep shame and an intense fear of emasculation, of being viewed as intellectually or sexually inferior.
He certainly carries a profound inferiority complex, particularly compared to Dan, who plays the smooth, artistic intellectual.
Precisely. So when Larry is betrayed by his wife, Anna, what happens? His exile is completely exposed. He feels utterly humiliated, but his firefighter part doesn't seek healing or comfort.
No, it seeks blood.
It becomes a cruel, relentless truth-teller. He engages in retaliatory, revenge-driven sex, but more importantly, he interrogates Anna. He demands every explicit, agonizing detail of her affair with Dan.
Which is excruciating to watch.
It is. He uses raw, naked truth as an acid to corrode his partner's self-esteem. He weaponizes the facts to regain dominance. And I argue this is the most destructive psychological protector because it fundamentally believes it holds the moral high ground.
Because he's claiming, I just want honesty.
Yes, it demands the truth, which makes it almost impossible to dismantle. You can't argue against someone who claims they just want the facts, even when they are using those facts to literally obliterate your soul. It's an active, aggressive destruction of the relationship.
I hear that, but I have to stop you there. I look at Larry's destruction and think, wait, you cannot blow up a bridge that was never actually built.
Oh, come on. That is completely letting Larry off the hook for active emotional violence.
I'm not letting him off the hook. I certainly acknowledge the damage Larry causes. It's visceral. But the failure of these relationships is baked in from the very first frame because of the absolute reliance on masks.
Okay. Explain what you mean by that.
Let's look at Dan and Alice. Dan's manager part plays the sensitive romantic writer, but his exile is just a lonely child terrified of mediocrity. His firefighter uses the thrill of new affairs to extinguish his internal pain. He uses women as painkillers.
Well, sure, he's constantly seeking a new muse to save him from his own emptiness.
But the most extreme manifestation of this avoidance is Alice, or, as we eventually learn at the very end of the film, Jane. Her manager created a completely fabricated identity. She literally uses a fake name, Alice, for years with Dan.
Which is wild when you really think about it.
It's the ultimate defense. Why does she do it? Because it ensures that if she is ever hurt, her true self, Jane, isn't touched. Let's go back to your PR analogy. If you only ever interact with my PR rep and you insult my PR rep, I don't bleed.
If you don't know who I am, you can't hurt me.
Exactly. And when she feels pressure, her firefighter's response is simply to disappear, to vanish.
So you're saying the evasion is actually worse than the attack?
I'm saying this absolute reliance on evasion is the deeper tragedy. They are communicating strictly protector to protector. The manager of one is manipulating the firefighter of the other.
Right.
Because they are never interacting from their true self, they ensure they remain complete strangers, even when they are physically intimate for years.
I see why you think that, but let me push back on this idea of the bridge not being built. Because while Alice's evasion is tragic, it is a defensive withdrawal. It's a shield.
A very thick shield.
Right, but Larry's obsession with the truth is a sword, and it fundamentally corrupts the very idea of intimacy. Let's look closely at how these defenses weaponize the concept of truth itself. When Larry forces Anna to recount the details of the affair, how is that operating internally?
He's gathering ammunition.
But he isn't trying to understand her. His firefighter is actually engaging in a form of psychological self-harm. By forcing her to tell him the most painful facts, he is generating enough explosive rage to justify his control over her.
Wow.
He needs the agonizing details to feed the protective anger that keeps his underlying shame at bay.
But evasion is also a weapon, though. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that a shield is harmless. Evasion weaponizes the truth by entirely withholding it. It's an act of emotional starvation.
Starvation, sure, but it's not active bludgeoning.
But let's not forget Dan also violently pursues the truth. He relentlessly forces Alice to reveal her real name against her will. He invades her protective space to satisfy his own need for possessive knowledge. Both evasion and obsession are mechanisms to push the other person away while maintaining the illusion of intimacy.
But if objective truth is being used as a blunt instrument to literally bludgeon a partner into submission, isn't that inherently more damaging to a psychological system than simply hiding? Larry's truth leaves casualties. Alice's hiding just leaves an empty room.
That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what truth actually is in the context of human connection. We have to distinguish between objective truth and internal truth.
Okay, let's unpack that. What's the difference?
Objective truth is Larry's torture device. It's the cold, hard data, who did what, when, and how. Internal truth is vulnerability. Internal truth is looking at your partner and saying, I feel incredibly lonely right now, and my exile is terrified that I'm not attractive enough for you.
Right, the stuff that's actually hard to say.
Exactly. Without internal truth, objective truth is entirely meaningless. It's just ammunition. The tragedy of closer is that they constantly substitute objective data for actual internal vulnerability.
That is a fascinating distinction, substituting objective data for vulnerability. If anyone listening has ever caught themselves demanding to see their partner's text messages instead of just admitting they feel insecure and disconnected, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yes, you're demanding objective truth because internal truth feels way too dangerous.
Too exposed. Even so, let's pivot to what happens when we try to untie these psychological knots. Because if we look at which of these characters is actually capable of being healed, I still maintain Larry's dynamic is the hardest knot to untie.
Really? You don't think Alice is more entrenched?
No, because Larry takes his exile's pain and successfully converts it into power and control. He technically wins the game at the end of the film. He gets his wife Anna back, but he loses completely internally. He possesses a body, not a soul.
Yeah, a hollow victory.
Completely hollow. And in IFS therapy, a protector that is rewarded with power is terrifying. How do you use compassion on a protector that views compassion itself as a weakness? You can't. The system is permanently locked.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the potential residing in Alice? Because we have to look at who actually has the capacity for healing here. To say Alice is a lost cause ignores the fact that she is the only character in this quartet who possesses what IFS calls an observing self.
An observing self?
Yes, she has implicit self-awareness. She knows exactly when she is lying, and she knows when she is genuinely loving. The others are completely blind to their own blending. Dan actually believes his romantic delusions, Larry believes his righteous anger, Alice knows she is playing a role.
But wait, hold on. Her internal bottleneck is just as severe, isn't it? Even if she knows she's playing a role, her exile truly, fundamentally believes that Jane is entirely unlovable. She protects Jane by serving up Alice to be loved and hurt. She's living under a fake name.
She is. And that is where the clinical tools of IFS become so crucial to understanding her tragedy. Alice has the capacity to heal, but she lacks the environment to do so safely. What she needs is to execute an IFS U-turn.
Wait, walk me through that. What does a U-turn actually look like for someone like Alice? If she's panicking because Dan is demanding her real name, what is she physically doing in a U-turn?
Right. So instead of focusing her energy outward, instead of managing Dan's demands or Larry's interrogations, she needs to stop, take a breath, and focus inward on the physical sensation in her body.
Like a somatic check-in?
Exactly. Maybe it's a tightness in her chest or a knot in her stomach. That sensation is the protector. She needs to ask that tightness, what are you guarding right now? And then she needs to engage in witnessing.
Witnessing the exile.
Yes. Her adult, capable self needs to visualize that terrified exile little Jane and show her that she is now a grown woman who can protect her without needing to erase her identity.
So she has to comfort the part of her that feels unlovable, rather than just throwing a fake persona over it to take the hits.
Yes, but the tragedy is that the toxic predatory environment of these men entirely prevents her from doing that work safely. The moment she tries to be vulnerable, they demand possession.
Which brings us to this systemic gridlock of these relationships. You're talking about Alice's ability to heal or leave, but we can't talk about that without looking at Anna, who is completely paralyzed and trapped in the middle of all of this.
Oh, Anna is so stuck.
We've talked about Larry the aggressor and Alice the evader, but Anna is the polarized middleman. Her internal system is entirely frozen by what IFS calls a polarization. She is torn between two warring manager parts.
Safety versus passion.
Exactly. One manager is desperately seeking order, safety, and practicality, which draws her to Larry's stability. The other manager part seeks empathy, aliveness, and romance, which draws her to Dan. All the while she is carrying this deep-seated exile of guilt.
She is essentially a passenger in her own life. She just lets these two warring manager parts yank her back and forth between two men, never actually feeling at home with either of them. Because, well, she isn't at home with herself.
Exactly. And to break this kind of polarization, where you're just bouncing between toxic options, the characters need the IFS process of unblending. They have to separate their true self from these raging protectors.
That's a tall order for this group.
It is. But I look at this and think, if Larry could just unblend, the whole system could de-escalate. Instead of attacking Anna with, "You're a traitor," he needs to step back from the firefighter, unblend, and say, "A part of me feels deeply humiliated right now, and it wants to lash out to stop the pain." If he speaks for the part instead of from the part, the entire dynamic shifts. It invites empathy instead of defensive retaliation.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because it assumes a level of safety that simply does not exist in this ecosystem. It really challenges the optimism of unblending in a fundamentally toxic system.
You think it's too optimistic?
Way too optimistic. In IFS, there is a wild card reality that we have to acknowledge. Sometimes the most effective way to untie the knot is to refuse to play, to leave. It is impossible to unblend and show your soft underbelly when the people around you are actively hunting your exiles.
Hunting your exiles, wow.
It's true. Dan only loves the concept of a woman. Larry only wants possession of a woman. Neither of them actually wants to connect with the authentic self of their partner.
But wait, if leaving is the only answer, isn't that a failure of the therapeutic model? If the goal of IFS is to foster connection and heal the internal system so you can relate to others, simply walking away feels like a resignation.
Not necessarily.
It feels like saying these parts are too damaged to integrate. Doesn't that mean Larry's objective truth weapon actually won? It successfully destroyed the entire system?
Not at all. And this is why the ending of the film, particularly for Alice, is so profound. At the end of the movie, she makes a decision to set a hard boundary. She drops the Alice mask, she returns to being Jane, and she completely disappears from Dan's life. That is actually her highest act of self-leadership.
Wait, really? Leaving is self-leadership?
Yes, because in IFS, healing doesn't always mean staying and making the relationship work. Sometimes, the most profound act of the authentic self is recognizing that the external system is unredeemable and acting to protect the internal system from further trauma.
That makes a lot of sense.
She realizes Dan demands a truth he isn't actually strong enough to hold. He wants her real name, but he doesn't want her real pain. So her self steps in, takes the wheel from the protectors, and says, "This environment is too toxic for my exile. We are leaving."
Wow. I see your point there. She enacts a boundary that the others are completely incapable of forming. Because look at the contrast. Dan just cycles right back to his emptiness, walking down the street looking for the next muse.
Yep.
And Anna? Anna resigns herself to the prison of Larry's stability, which isn't stability at all. It's just a guilt-driven submission to his control.
Exactly. Anna chooses to stop being an active participant in her life. She hands the reins entirely over to her manager part that just wants the conflict to stop, even if it means waking up every day next to a man who holds her in contempt. She trades her authenticity for an end of the fighting.
So bringing this all together, my position remains that the violent enforcement of objective truth by protective parts represents the most intractable barrier to the self. When you use facts as battering rams to mask your own profound internal shame, you shatter the foundation of intimacy.
I hear you.
Larry's hollow victory at the end of the film, possessing Anna physically while her spirit is completely disconnected and deadened, is the ultimate psychological warning. It shows us exactly what happens when deep trauma and insecurity are converted into a mechanism of control. When you weaponize the truth to avoid feeling your own pain, you guarantee that you will remain isolated forever.
And my position remains that the absolute avoidance of vulnerability, the reliance on protective masks and evasion, means these connections were doomed from the very start. Alice's tragedy and Dan's perpetual emptiness demonstrate that even if you possess a degree of self-awareness, an unsafe system makes authenticity impossible. You cannot build a house on a foundation of protective illusions.
Right.
Evasion ensures that the people involved never actually meet. They just bump their armor together and call it love.
I love that phrasing, bumping their armor together. And I think that's exactly where we find our strongest point of convergence today. The core IFS lesson that this narrative provides is undeniable. When you attempt to love someone using your parts rather than your authentic self, love inevitably devolves into a war of defense mechanisms.
Absolutely. We are in total agreement there. We see it so clearly in this material, and honestly in real life. My protector attacks your protector manipulates mine, and in that crossfire, the real people are entirely lost. The only path to genuine connection is an internal revolution where the self is restored to leadership. You have to comfort your own exiles before you can truly see the person standing in front of you.
It really reframes how we look at our own conflicts. We started this discussion by comparing honesty to a bridge or a battering ram. But the truth is, the architectural integrity of that bridge doesn't depend on the cold, hard steel of objective facts. It depends on the vulnerability of the people standing on it.
So true.
There is so much more to explore in how we, in our own lives, substitute weaponized facts or evasive masks for actual terrifying vulnerability. It leaves us with a question we all have to answer for ourselves. When you feel your exile triggered, which defense mechanism takes the wheel? Are you using the truth to build a bridge, or are you using it to burn one down?